Well, we're back after 2 weeks and nothing's happened.
It's even more of a mess. I mean, I feel that we depart for a fortnight, we turn our backs for a few short moments, and we come back to another gigantic, mind-melting mess.
So we thank all the newscasters who've been listening assiduously to newscasts all covering the crises, plural.
Yes.
We are, in a way, humbly coming back into your earbuds because we're just offering the Saturday newscast, but I have a feeling it's going to be dominated by Starmageddon.
I think it will, because yet again, Starmageddon is unfolding in front of our eyes. Yet again, as one senior MP said to me, oh no, here we go again, because of the saga around Keir Starmer's original decision many, many months ago to give one Peter Mandelson the plum job of being Britain's ambassador to the United States.
Welcome to Saturday's newscast. Hello, it's Paddy in the studio.
And it's Laura in the studio, and how nice to be back together. Now, shall we have a quick little recap, and then we can talk about all the different elements of this fiasco. So this week, on Thursday night, Keir Starmer fired the top Mandarin at the Foreign Office, Sir Olly Robbins. He fired him because of an excellent scoop from our journalistic colleagues at The Guardian that revealed that Peter Mandelson had failed the specific security vetting carried out by a government agency. Despite that, one Sir Olly Robbins had cleared Peter Mandelson for the job of becoming the American ambassador, but he did not tell anyone in Downing Street or any government minister that he had done that. Off with his head, in with his P45, out the door he went.
And so disputed is the account, so dancing is Downing Street on the head of a pin, and the allies of Sir Olly Robbins have said it's possible that Olly Robbins did not see the final vetting document, knowing that he had failed the test is disputed. As some of his allies have said, it's not like a driving test where you fail it. It's like a risk assessment, and you've described it in your online article, which I have read, and this is where I law-explain. You've described it like a credit check for a bank.
That's right. So I think there are some things that we have to try and understand if you want to even begin to make sense of this story. First off, what is vetting? So vetting generically is the process by which people who get important jobs in government, whether they're officials or politicians, and people dig into their backgrounds. Now, the element of this, which we know that was failed by Peter Mandelson, was the security check carried out by what's essentially a Quango, the United Kingdom vetting agency. They're commissioned to do that work by the Foreign Office, a bit like a bank might ask a credit agency to look into, what you've been naughtily spending your money on. But the decision stays with the Foreign Office about whether or not that person is still okay to get the job. A bit like a bank would make the ultimate decision about whether you get their loan, but they'd be informed by the report that the credit checking agency have been done on you. Now, the accusation against Sir Olly Robbins in this case is that not only is it extraordinary to think that he might have been happy to let a controversial person like Peter Mandelson go forward for a job if he'd failed that specific vetting check, but also for him not to have stuck his hand up in the last months of meltdown and said, oh, by the way, Prime Minister, or even, by the way, Cabinet Secretary, or even, by the way, Foreign Secretary, there might be something you need to know about what happened many, many months ago. Now, his defence is that the whole process of vetting is meant to be confidential, of course, or else it would completely fall over. Nobody would ever put themselves forward for it. But in these controversial circumstances, the charge is twofold. Is one, how did he make that decision in the first place? But two, how did he then allow senior people in this country, including the Prime Minister, to say misleading things to the public that suggested that Peter Mandelson had passed all the right checks?
And I can offer a wrinkle in reply.
Good.
Which is, in the timeline, the Prime Minister had appointed Peter Mandelson before the credit check, as you describe it, the developed vetting process had been finished. So, allies of Olly Robbins, this goes back to my dancing on the head of a pin story, The Allies have said it's the job of the civil service to deliver the government's programme, and therefore Olly Robbins was effectively doing the job that he was recently employed to do, which was to enact the government's bidding. The government's bidding was, ooh, Peter Mandelson, no problems have ever come to light with him, have they? He's never had a nickname, the Prince of Darkness. He's never had rich and powerful friends. He never had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, did he? Oh, yes, he did. Yes, he did have a... So they appointed him. That's the whole shebang. They appointed him. Then Olly Robbins... It was his job, say his allies.
Let's listen to what Sir Simon MacDonald said. He's somebody who did that same job. So in times gone by, he was also the civil service boss at the Foreign Office. And he was trying to explain where Olly Robbins might have been coming from on the Today programme this morning.
Within the news cycle, Olly Robbins had been required to resign. I mean, this shows to me that the number 10 wanted a scalp, and they wanted it quickly. I cannot see that there was any process, any fairness, any giving him the chance to set out his case, and that feels to me wrong. Security vetting is a key part of the system, a key part of a posting overseas. It is a confidential process. So there is a report. The details of that report are very closely held. They would never be shared with number 10 or the Prime Minister. If there had been a failure, then that fact, that ultimate conclusion would have to be conveyed to the political level. But the fact that it was not indicates to me that the picture was more complicated than number 10 wished to present.
So what Simon MacDonald is suggesting there, Paddy, this picture is much more complicated than one piece of paper that had a big red cross against Peter Mandelson's name that Olly Robbins tore up and chucked in the bin and said, never mind, he can have the job anyway. And it's complicated for quite a few different reasons. First off, as you say, and I think this is probably the most important one, Keir Starmer had already announced that Peter Mandelson was going to be the American ambassador to the States. The notion of that had been sold to Donald Trump's new White House. For anyone, therefore, to say, oh, stick the brakes on, we can't do this, could have caused a really big political ruction. It would have been embarrassing for the Prime Minister. It might have angered the Trump White House. Remember at that stage how carefully Keir Starmer was trying to build a relationship with the flamboyant maverick with a troubled past, the president, on his way back to the White House, by sending him a flamboyant maverick with a troubled past who he'd concluded was the best man for the job. So imagine what kind of reaction there might have been if Peter Mandelson's appointment had been torn up and chucked out. The second thing that's really important that you and I have talked about on Newscast a lot, and we reported on it when this all blew up back in September 2005, is this vetting took place after the Cabinet Office had already done its own process. And then Keir Starmer had asked his own questions of Peter Mandelson via his Chief of Staff, Morgan Sweeney, after that process had completed. So the context for Olly Robbins here is he knows that the Prime Minister wants the job. That's out there in public. That's not even a question of, private push inside government. Point two, Olly Robbins knows that there's already been a process carried out by the Cabinet Office Ethics and Propriety Department, the PET report, as it's rather ridiculously called. He knows both of those things, and both of those things have led the Prime Minister to conclude that Peter Mandelson should be the man in Washington. So therefore, some people might suggest it would be pretty difficult for Olly Robbins to have put the brake on that process. Now, we don't know what Olly Robbins saw. We don't know what the vetting agency's report threw up. We don't know if it raised issues that were very different to what had been in the original vetting report. But both those two bits of context are very, very important when it comes to this. But it will be absolutely fascinating box office next week when first Keir Starmer on Monday is going to have to answer questions about this. And then Olly Robbins has been summoned to speak to MPs about exactly what happened next week too on Tuesday.
Yes, and of course the sequencing of it means that the Prime Minister can't, even if he hopes to, can't shut it down on Monday. So we know we're going to have to readdress with Downing Street what the Tuesday testimony of Sir Olly Robbins is before the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. The Prime Minister goes first, and many party leaders have said he has misled the House of Commons, and under the ministerial code, which Keir Starmer beefed up himself, and we should contrast his behaviour as the leader of the opposition when facing Boris Johnson, which we'll do in a moment. But do you have an answer as an impartial journalist to the question, did the Prime Minister mislead the House of Commons?
The Prime Minister said things that, given what we know now, definitely gave us a misleading picture about Peter Mandelson's suitability and clearance for the job. And the specific charge there lies actually to an answer that the Prime Minister gave to a question from a journalist when he said that Peter Mandelson had been cleared by the security vetting process. But did he give a misleading picture? Yes, he did. And that's why Downing Street is so apoplectically furious about this. You know, Keir Starmer has been all over the airwaves yesterday saying how angry he is. He's furious. People in government are flabbergasted at everything that happened. And you can see why. Undoubtedly, you can see why any political leader would think, well, hang on a minute, I was sent out with information that turns out not to have been quite 100% true. There are, though, to use your word of the day, quite a lot of wrinkles with that. One, how do you define what the actual process is? If you're Olly Robbins, you might think, well, I completely followed the process because the process was take a look at all the information, take that report into consideration, but actually I followed the process because I thought, well, you know what, the risk can be managed and he's already been given the job anyway.
And it's my job to implement the government policy.
Correct. So you could say, if you're Olly Robbins, I followed the process to a letter. You could also say, if you're in government, well, hang on a minute, civil servants are meant to make sure that ministers don't mislead the House. They're meant to make sure that everything's done accurately. And he didn't do that. So actually, he didn't follow the process properly at all. Two views are available when looking at the same circumstances. The second wrinkle is that there is also a law here. If you are as sad as I am, and you've been looking carefully at this for the last 24 hours, under the Constitutional Reform and Governments Act, Section 3, it says very clearly that security vetting is nothing to do with ministers. It's about officials, and officials are bound by confidentiality. They're not meant to be spilling their guts to ministers about what has gone on. If you talk to people in government about that, they say, aha, but yes, you can tell them the outcome of the decision. And officials are also bound by the Civil Service Code, which is a code, not a law, but it also says very clearly that they need to make sure that ministers have got, you know, the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So I suggest in the end, a lot of this is going to come down to that sort of battle that we always have in Westminster between process, political reality, and then perception. So is the perception here that Keir Starmer went out and said things that were not true? Absolutely. Do people who are backers of Olly Robbins, who's got a reputation as a very capable, very process-focused stickler for the rules in government, do they think that he followed the process? Yes, they do. But is the political reality that in this whole disaster, Keir Starmer needed someone to point the finger at and blame? Yes, he did.
So let's look at some of the key questions that both men will face. Mm-hmm. One of them always is timeline. Mm-hmm. The ministerial code says you must clear up and make transparent things that are mistakes at the earliest opportunity. Mm-hmm. Prime Minister, is Monday the earliest opportunity when you knew last week?
Well, that depends who you ask. So the government took a very unusual step. They published the minute of a meeting that happened last week where you can see in black and white that the Prime Minister hadn't known up until that point. And you can see there that he's saying, OK, and I'm paraphrasing, we've got to find out exactly what's happened and then we've got to correct the record. So they've tried to sort of preempt that by putting that document out into the public domain. I have no doubt that the opposition parties are going to try and give him a hard time over not coming clean absolutely straight away. we know now also that a couple of very senior civil servants, Antonio Romeo, the Cabinet Secretary, and Kat Little, the head of the Cabinet Office, both knew some time ago, I don't mean like months and months and months,
Weeks.
but in recent weeks, they, however, here's an irony here, we're sort of trying to find out from a legal point of view, were they able to tell the PM? Because there is that law that says security vetting shouldn't be shared. So that's all kind of quite murky, but you're right, the timeline is going to be really, really important. So there's that pressing question of, has the PM come clean quickly enough?
Prime Minister, when you said he had been security cleared, he had not. So you were misleading in that answer, were you not?
And there's two questions here. One, is that something that Keir Starmer assumed because it hadn't been flagged to number 10? Two, is that something that he was deliberately told? Three, why hadn't he asked and checked? Because this has been one of the hottest, most damaging, enormous, see it from space political controversies that has haunted Keir Starmer and his team for months and months and months and months and months on end. And you've got one camp in Westminster saying, how on earth can Olly Robbins have taken this decision on his own without telling a minister? You've got another camp in Westminster saying, how on earth did Downing Street not ask this basic question? Because as soon as this thing blows up, imagine you give someone a job, it all goes terribly wrong. You say, oh God, who checked the references? Bring them to me right now. I want to see exactly everything that we knew. And it appears that Keir Starmer didn't really do that. And that's why when you talk to, Labour Party insiders and MPs about it, you get back very quickly to the overall sense of disappointment about how Keir Starmer's run his operation. And somebody said to me, it feels like he has never gripped the danger of this whole Mandelson row. And that involves a sort of lack of curiosity about really getting to the bottom of it. And I spoke to lots of people saying, look, even if this vetting report said what it said, it is astonishing to imagine that in the managing of this crisis, that Downing Street has only just in the last couple of weeks managed to actually even find out that that wasn't the case. Now, I'm told that the Foreign Office had been resisting passing this document across, but there's an awful lot of dispute at the moment about who exactly had done what and this, that and the other. And I suspect also there may well be on all sides some rather convenient hiding behind, well, we couldn't possibly do this because that wasn't convention. And then the other side always, we couldn't possibly do this because of that convention. But, I think at root, this has been a mess for a very, very long time. The last 72 hours tells us very clearly that Keir Starmer, as a leader, has failed to get a grip on it because he keeps being blindsided by more stuff coming out from Peter Mandelson's whole appointment around the US.
It is his Partygate. That's what it is. And questions to Olly Robbins. Sir Oliver, did you
I'm enjoying this role. I feel like, so I was the Prime Minister last time. Did I do a good job of that or not? Now I'll be Olly Robbins.
Thank you for coming for our committee.
Okay.
Did you see the full developed vetting advice, including red boxes? Did you see the full advice or did you see redacted advice?
So I don't know how Olly Robbins will play this. He may say, I'm bound not to get into any of this detail. I'm happy to share it with the Intelligence and Security Committee, or I'm happy to write to you confidentially, but I am bound by the same laws I was bound by now outside government than I was bound by while inside government. I just don't know how we play it. The answer to that question, I think, may, however, be think of big civil service departments as a pyramid. You've got people sort of in the kind of bottom half doing the work with all the papers. The higher you go up the pyramid, the skinnier it gets. By the time you get to the top of the boss, they're not necessarily going to be given a big 100-page report of something. They might be given a one side of A4. They might even have a trusted official or trusted staff member telling them something without them seeing all the documents. We don't know exactly what he was told, but that is not impossible. And again, it's not impossible that vetting process turned up much that wasn't already in the other report that had been done by a different bit of government. So again, there's a second question. If you want to go back to our role play, we'll do it the other way. Sir Olly Robbins,
Is it
Why
me
did
now?
you not demand to see the full vetting report if you did not see the full vetting report, knowing how controversial this appointment might have been? Indeed, there were people in the Foreign Office who thought it was a terrible idea to put Peter Mandelson in that job.
So now I have to take two routes. One, there were three routes. There's the routes where I've said I can't possibly discuss security vetting under protocols that are
Correct.
well known under the law. There's that one. So in which case I say I'm very sorry indeed, Madam Chairwoman, but I can't go into that. Then there's a version where I say I haven't seen the whole report, but I feel I am able to say that. So I can say, well, as I've already testified, it's just not done that way, Madam Chair. I don't see the full report. I'm advised of my statutory role to advise the Prime Minister and to carry out the government's programme. The appointment of Lord Mandelson had already been announced, and it was my clear job under the very well-known statutes to enact the government's programme. And I had discretion and was advised I had discretion legally, and there we are.
We should also just say Sir Olly Robbins doesn't sound like
Well,
that.
we're being descriptive.
So yes, you're being Sir Humphrey.
Then there's the third
You're
option.
inhabiting the role very well.
Then there's the third answer. I preferred it when I was asking the question.
Okay. Don't we all?
Don't we all? Yes. So then there's the third version of this,
Yeah.
which is where I have told them that I did see the whole report. And then I have to explain there what the consequences of seeing the whole report are.
Yes.
But that's very closely aligned to the first answer, because I can't, under the law, I can't say what's in the report.
Correct.
So I'm then in a very interesting sort of live testimony moment where I can tell you I've seen it, but I can't tell you what I saw.
Correct. Which is where the whole thing gets into, a kind of Kafka, Orwellian, or Yes Minister sitcom from the 80s. Pick your bizarre reality where people can't really say anything. Well, I do know what I don't know, but I don't know what I do know, and you can't know anything that I know because then you would know what I know. You just get into this
did that very
ridiculous
well.
cycle. Thank you. I'm sure it didn't make any sense
It did
at all.
to me. It just brought it all home. So I think we now need, as promised, to compare this to the duffing up that Sir Keir, as leader of the opposition, gave to Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. I've just been reviewing the clips, actually.
Yeah.
And it's things like, think very carefully before answering this question. And then there's another moment in the Commons where he goes, he's either he knew what was going on, or he didn't. He wasn't in control. That's another, and you can hear in the whole House thinking, yes, those are the choices.
That's right. And again, it comes to a fact that in politics, ignorance is not a defence. You can have a debate about whether it should be or not, but ignorance in politics is not a defence. If you are a political leader to say, oh, sorry, I didn't know. Politicians, leaders are the ultimate in accountability and authority. That is the whole basis on which our system rests, which is why Keir Starmer was so effectively able to go after Boris Johnson in that way for a long time. And they lent into it week after week after week after week. You had Mr. Rules going after Captain Sleaze to be a terribly cartoony person about it. It worked for Labour, and now they're finding, fairly or not, that the boot is on the other foot. And, when you talk to people who are loyal to Keir Starmer, you can hear almost this sort of agony in their voices. One of them said to me, this is so painful for Keir Starmer because he sees himself, and he is, they believe, a man of such integrity. But this row, to use their phrase, was sort of wiping that away in the public's eyes. And it comes also at a time when the government has been struggling on all sorts of fronts. They've been unpopular for a long time. They're going to the polls in a couple of weeks in Scotland, in Wales, and right round England in a huge set of elections. And right when they felt things might have been beginning to stabilise a little bit, here they go again, another big fat mess over Peter Mandelson, which is the worst kind of political story because it talks to sleaze, it talks to bad behaviour, it talks to kind of power and ambition, someone everyone's heard of, which not all political rows involve. You know, this is not obscure, again, to use our word of the day, this is not an obscure wrinkle. This is a controversy that has once every few months blown up in flames, goes away for a while, blows up in flames, goes away for a while. And Keir Starmer's just not been able to move on from it.
And you've done much more work than I have with victims who are in news stories. And in this case, in this simple case, it was known that Peter Mandelson was a friend of Jeffrey Epstein.
It was.
It was known what the scope of some of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes was. And so if you are on the side of victims, you say, actually, you know what I think, if we are going to honestly listen to victims and be on their side, we don't give the top job that I can give, really, one of the top jobs I can give as Prime Minister, we don't give it to a friend. Now, being a friend does not imply guilt, but it does, to your point about perception, it does seem to say that victims have not been listened to at the point of that appointment.
Look, there are certainly lots of people in the Labour Party who believed at the time of the appointment that the Epstein connection, which Mandelson had apologised for, he said that he shouldn't have been his friend, that was all out there in the public domain. But there were people who felt at the time that meant he should not ever have been on the list for that job. The fact is, Keir Starmer knew it was a risk, but it was a risk that he and his chief of staff were willing to take. Now, politics is about calculated risks. There was a moment when it looked like that risk had really been paying off. The UK got a better trade deal with the United States than many other countries. The relationship between Trump and Starmer initially seemed incredibly warm. There was all the bonhomie. Some people thought it was absolutely skin-curdling, but other people looked at it and went, well played, Keir Starmer. No one would ever have thought that you, of all people, the right-on lawyer from North London, would have been the person to be able to get a great smooth entry into having a relationship with this maverick, unpredictable, sometimes bellicose American president. But look, here you are laughing and joking in the Oval Office. Wow, well played, Peter Mandelson. But of course, when that drip of terrible revelations coming out of the Epstein files emerge, of course, that's when that relationship and that past and the extent of those links became clearer, and then his position simply wasn't tenable. But I was thinking yesterday, I was just reminded that it did take quite some time for Keir Starmer to get to that point. Do you remember that week when there was more and more coming out and more and more coming out, and then there was a kind of, oh my goodness, he's going to have to go. And Keir Starmer was criticised at that time for not seeing the risk. Not seeing the risk in the first place, but not then acting quickly enough. And then in the end, having to fire Peter Mandelson. Then, of course, we spoke to him back at the turn of the year. And he sort of said, well, Downing Street knew everything.
And so you go back to the initial question. I'm the Prime Minister. I made this decision. Is this fatal for me?
I think not immediately, because as one MP said to me, this puts another nail in the coffin of the Prime Minister if you could fit another one in, because it's basically made of nails now. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but there are more quotes of that nature available in my piece on the BBC website. I think it doesn't mean that in the next couple of days he's going to be out on his uppers. We're in the middle of an election campaign. The Labour Party still has a huge issue with being fairly convinced that there's an awful lot of problems in the Starmer operation, fairly convinced that he's probably not going to be the man that will take them into the next general election, but not convinced what the other option actually is. I think this probably changes the calculation a little bit in terms of what is likely to happen after the election results in May. But is this immediately going to be meaning an exit for Keir Starmer? It doesn't feel like that, because nobody has produced evidence that he deliberately misled or lied to anyone. Did he say things that were not right and that seem untrue in public? Yes, that's why he is so furious. But is there evidence that on his part that was deliberate? No, there is not. But look, this is a really febrile and unpredictable situation. So look, you never quite know. But another thing that I just wanted to say briefly on this, it obviously doesn't help with the public, and it obviously doesn't help with an increasingly fed up members of the Labour Party. And I get the sense that some people inside Labour are starting to be increasingly wound up by the Prime Minister coming out and saying, do you know what? I'm really cross.
Yeah.
I'm really, really cross. I'm really, really cross that something's gone wrong. If it's your government and you're in charge, that's an emotional response. That's not a response of action.
Yeah.
That's a reaction to things going wrong. That's not actually presenting a solution or taking responsibility. You know, being cross for something when it's your organisation is kind of, it's a response that's not going down well with everybody on his own side, I have to say.
Because the pavement outside number 10 resembles the departure lounge at Heathrow Terminal 3. Sue Gray, Matthew Doyle, Angela Rayner, Paul Ovenden, James Lyons, Stephanie Driver, Morgan McSweeney, Tim Allen, Sir Chris Wormald, Louise Haig, Tulip Sadiq, Annalise Dodds, Andrew Gwynn, Sir Olly Robbins, Peter Mandelson, in one way or another, all defenestrated.
That's right.
Resigned.
That's right. And several people had to go already specifically over the Mandelson mess. And Keir Starmer, you know, he's the boss. He's not yet been held accountable because of that. But the opposition parties, I think, are going to have a good old go in the next few days, for sure.
I should say there will be names on that list who said, I was at the end of my contract. I wanted to leave. So we haven't got time to go through the full 15.
Oh, we'll be here forever if we had. There's a whole podcast series about people
Well,
who've
there'll be people listening
Keir
saying, I
Starmer's
wasn't
government.
defenestrated. Paddy's got, I wasn't defenestrated. O'Connell's wrong. So I just put that in there.
Yeah.
Then they can blame me, not
No,
you.
but for a government that's not yet 2 years into his life, it is absolutely relevant and valid to point out that an awful lot of people have gone out one way of the revolving door. You know, there have been an unusual number of departures, I think, for a government that still has a huge majority, hasn't even been in charge for 2 years yet, and should be still in their pomp. But they certainly aren't. We should give you the government statement. There have been lots of quotes on the record from angry ministers, but the government has been saying neither the Prime Minister nor any government minister was aware that Peter Mandelson was granted development vetting against the advice of UK security vetting until earlier this week. Once the Prime Minister was informed on Tuesday, he immediately instructed officials to establish the facts about why the developed vetting was granted so he could update Parliament at the earliest opportunity. As part of our commitment to transparency, we've published a readout of the meeting between the Prime Minister, the Cabinet Secretary and the Cabinet Office Permanent Secretary, where the Prime Minister was made aware. So that's what we were referring to earlier. That was number 10's sort of attempt to manage the fallout of this by publishing an account of a meeting. But, you know, another former official, sort of old hand in government, said to me, why did they just not get all of this out straight away? Give it all to the Intelligence and Security Committee, which is a kind of secret committee who could then decide, just hand it all over at the beginning of this mess. That is the basics. They said to me, just get it all out. This has been running for ages and ages and ages, and the government is still being pushed on this rather than being out on the front foot. Because don't forget, this all came out because of the work of journalists. Our colleagues at the Guardian newspaper are the people who brought this to light. And successive governments have found that if you're in a sticky wicket, the successful way through tends to be to control the information flow rather than wait to be found out. That's all for today's episode of Newscast on TV, or if you've been watching on YouTube. But you can find the rest of me and Paddy's conversation on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts, as well as all the other Newscast episodes from time gone by. Goodbye for now.